America was built by and for the white Christian people of this nation.
James Baldwin has this quote. He says, "To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to wake up in rage almost all the time."
This is not just a black issue. It's not just a Hispanic issue. This is an American issue.
The president has divided this country so badly.
Why do white people not have White History Month or, those sort of same a white culture? It's because they don't really need that, and black people and other minorities, black and brown people, need those sort of communities to heal together. So
Have to lose. You're living in poverty. Your schools are no good. You have no jobs. 58% of your youth is unemployed.
This is my life. Every single day I am reminded that I'm of color. Every single day when I walk into a classroom, when I see a police officer, when I'm walking on this campus, I cannot avoid it.
What is a legacy? What does it look like? The mirror and the reflection in the mirror.
What does it take for my life to matter?
Slavery has always existed, but in America, or in the Americas, and I'm adding in Latin America too, the Caribbean, those areas, it develops as a racialized system. But specifically in America, it's a truly racialized system in which your color defines your status. You just don't say you're a slave and the person accepts it. Slaves don't accept it, but you have to have a series of structures and set up in which you basically ensure that that population is completely controlled legally, socially, economically. I can't just say you're going to be a slave, but you're equal to me. I have to dehumanize you. I have to dehumanize your culture. You dehumanize the place that they come from. You dehumanize them. You classify them as less intelligent. You classify them as unable to make it if you were not, quote, protecting them. Racism, it's the chicken or the egg debate. Which comes first? Did slavery come first? Did racism come first? Or did they emerge kind of parallel to each other? Some historians have argued that they did not have the same kinds of prejudices that would develop. Did slavery develop first? Did racism happen first?
Black lives matter, 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 black lives matter.
I wake up and I go to class and, oh my God, I'm the only, student of color there. And you're just like, goodness gracious, right? And then, I walk out of class, I get in my car and I drive. I just want to, go get something to eat. And I'm not doing anything wrong. And I see a police officer and I'm scared.
To walk in the streets with my kids with me. I mean, face the reason. Tell them why.
Those attitudes change very slowly, especially when they're reinforced by a community that all upholds, it's like groupthink that upholds those values. And maybe even if people don't have those values, they're around people who do. So what happens with them? They're quiet.
So I have found myself surrounded by a lot of different other types of minorities. I would say predominantly Hispanics. And I usually, not usually, 100% of the time, I make sure if I'm friends with somebody, then we see eye to eye about important issues like race. So I make sure that they are not anti-black. But when I interact with them, like I have a close friend, and I noticed that her background was obviously different from mine. And the ways in which I noticed is that she did start out anti-black, but she didn't know that she started out anti-black. So she would say the N-word around me, and that was something that I have to check. And now she's at a point where she's checking other, minorities, other Hispanics in her community. When they say her boyfriend says it, and she makes sure that she checks him and all the rest of her friends and her family. So I do see that rivalry in a way, but not in a malicious sort of way, and more out of ignorance. Like, you're in a marginalized group and I'm in a marginalized group, so why can't we both share this? Why is it different? But I think it's important to realize the ways in which our struggles are different and be there in solidarity, but not try to take on each other's struggles. You know, use it as a reason to say the N-word or, you know, stuff like that.
Humans seem to have a remarkable way of finding ways to separate them from the other. Jealousy and envy and hatred. You know, I believe, you know, I'm a Christian, I believe in the Bible, and, you know, you think about the first murder in the Bible, it was over envy of a brother. I almost think that a lot of racism is about people's fears of someone else having something that they might not have. In a sense, almost from the founding of our colonies, we've dealt with this. So to think that what took so long to create would take a very short period of time, when we think about it, you know, when we think about Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act 64, 1965, that's not a long time ago. And to change people's attitudes about that, it's going to take a very, very, very long time. And then if you say that racism is taken out of the equation, what about class? Class and race and ethnic prejudice are all lined up into one.
I hear people all the time say, oh, you know, why are we still talking about race, right? We've overcome all of that. We had a black president. You know, why are we still talking about slavery and things of that nature? Well, you know, Brown versus the Board of Education was in 1954, right? The civil rights movement in the 60s, right? So I'm not bearing the burden of my ancestors. My friend, you're talking about my grandmother and my mother.
Some people want to just let it die. Why do we have to keep talking about reparations? Like, oh, it happened thousands and thousands of years ago. Just false. People don't know dates. People are so adamant in the U.S. to remember the Holocaust and to never let it happen again. The Holocaust comes up in like 8 of the 12 years of public school. In a history or social studies class, it's taught from like elementary school on up. And it didn't even happen on our continent. And slavery is taught not in 8 out of 12 public school, and it happened like in our country.
We need to recognize our privilege and practice humility.
I thought, okay, well, whatever, so they have darker skin, like that doesn't mean they have to be X or Y, but like it does hold you back because a lot of people have like unconscious biases. Like I honestly think unconscious biases and ignorance are at the root of the problem.
There have been places where we used to live in College Station for a little bit, and my mom and my dad went into this restaurant. And I don't know if you know College Station's reputation, but not exactly very welcoming to minorities at all. Maybe that's changing over the years, but this was back in the late 90s, so my mom and my dad, early 2000s, but around that time, they walked into this restaurant, and you could hear like a pin drop once they walked in. And I think the manager or something asked them to leave because they were making all the other patrons uncomfortable. So that was 2000s, you know, late 90s. So people aren't that comfortable with the idea of interracial anything.
I just didn't think that it was still an issue. I thought, okay, we've had the civil rights movements, everything is fine, so it is how it is. This is just how it shakes out, I guess, whatever. But then I realized there are such disparities, especially in the incarceration system. Like, it's basically the new Jim Crow laws.
I don't really feel like racism manifests itself in my my daily life. I mean, it doesn't, but at the same time, because my mom is Mexican and my dad is white, so sometimes it's kind of awkward because I'll be with like my twin brother who looks Hispanic and I look white, and it's like, I don't know if people could tell we're brothers or we're related or like how that all works.
I think it's important to acknowledge, because I don't really think it's something I've done before I've come to college, that because I'm biracial, I do have advantages that maybe black people don't have. So I think about the color of my skin. I think that the color of your skin, you know, definitely has an effect on the way people treat you. I think that colorism is something that I hadn't encountered until I talked to darker skinned people about it and realized the ways in which I was treated, you know, compared to the way they were treated. Other advantages, I feel as if there's a definite culture and community with being black, and I feel like I really get to take advantage of that in the fullest in the way that maybe other people can't. So there's a campus culture that I feel more connected to. There's a larger culture that I feel more connected to, and I feel more informed on issues of race because it's something that I have to experience on the day-to-day.
When a person tells an African American, you'll be the one to make it, I think that that's a thing that goes back to a long time ago when you had people who had zero opportunity trying to, as we say, make a way out of no way. If you're a slave, you know how to make a way out of no way. Or you're singing the spirituals of "Oh Freedom." The legacy is in music too. Spirituals, "Oh Freedom," "Go Down Moses," "The Drinking Gourd." Stories that talk about faith, but also hopes and dreams of freedom.
Oh, freedom. We're standing for our cause. We're standing for our cause.
It's interesting when you start thinking about the fact that we're witnessing this shift in which people are less overt with their racist tendencies, and that in some way, shape, or form signifies that we're making progress in the racial apparatus or the racial realm, or the realms of racial politics.
I would say I definitely encounter racism on a daily basis. It's more insidious, I think, than what most people would consider racism. It comes in the form of more subtle racism, I believe. A lot of people like to say microaggressions is the word. So ways in which you have to really think twice about, is this person treating me this way because of my race? So it happens all the time. You have an interaction with, we're at a PWI, we're at a predominantly white institution, so everybody around you is white, and that's something you can't really get away from. It's not something, you can't not notice that everyone around you is white. So if my peers are treating me a certain way in class, if my professor asks me something that I have to think twice about, I really have to think about, am I being paranoid? Am I thinking about race too much? Or is this justified? So it's very much so a battle within myself, I would say. But yes, I do encounter racism very often.
Slavery, the legacy looks in so many ways, some ways that we don't even know.
We really need to be talking about implicit bias, because a lot of it is, if I were just to ask you, would you treat me this way if I were white? And oftentimes, in fact, the majority of the time, and almost every time, the answer is no. Boom, 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 boom. I was afraid, right? It's just, goodness gracious.
I no longer know what black people need to do to not get shot. Because I don't understand. You walk towards a policeman, you get shot. Walk away from a policeman, you get shot. You lie down on the ground with your hands in the air, you still get shot.
Harvard University, with their implicit bias study, came out with this, sort of whole study, and I'm surprised that people really just aren't just like, this doesn't just blow people's minds, that, there was a computer-generated face, and they were showing individuals, here's a white computer-generated, same features, same everything, it was just a computer-generated face, and they just changed the skin tone, right? And people, for some reason, said that this brown face or this black face just looked inherently more angry than the white face. So when, a little black boy or a little black girl is pulled over, the fact of the matter is the stats show this, that they're less likely to walk out of that situation alive when they engage with a police officer.
I mean, like if a cop were to pull me over or something like that, like I don't think I would be as freaked out as say like a black person would or like a Hispanic person would.
When we think about the legacy of slavery, sometimes when we're studying it, we get so tied into the numbers, but sometimes we forget that there are real people who are living in these situations.
Race is in everything. And when you are not talking about race, when you think you're not talking about race, you're talking about whiteness because it has infused our entire culture. So if you don't want to say, play the race card, you'll start talking about race with more intention. So that way we can actually discover issues of racial oppression in this society and get to the point where things maybe won't be always about race.
So What is a legacy? You know, what does it look like? The mirror and the reflection in the mirror. That's what it looks like.